my amendment, and Big Agro kept my amendment from even being presented on the floor because they were almost certain it would pass. Mr. Speaker, we have to make changes in the future, so too much tax money will not go to Cadillac crop insurance programs. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Murphy from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in May, more than 130 employees at PBS Coals in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, were laid off. It was the third round of layoffs by the company in less than a year. The men and women of PBS Coals joined more than 5,000 coal miners who lost their jobs in 2012. With his announcement of cap and trade, the sequel, the President recently declared not just a war on coal, but a war on jobs. It won't just be coal miners who lose their jobs or Boilermakers who no longer are building and maintaining power plants, but also thousands of laborers, electricians, operating engineers, steam fitters, welders, plumbers, carpenters, machinists, and railroad workers will be out of work. Real people, real faces, real families. They'll join the 130 at a Joy Mining factory in Millersburg, Kentucky, who were laid off in March. Or in Peoria, Illinois, the hundreds of Boilermakers at a Komatsu equipment factory who were let go. And in Erie, Pennsylvania, where GE is laying off 950 workers at its locomotive plant because less coal means less work for the railroads. These men and women are out of work because at the country's 600 coal plants, more than 20% of all coal-fired units are being shut down, in part due to EPA regulations. And that was before the President's speech on Tuesday announcing new global warming regulations. Now more families will be out of work and struggling to get by. These are American families trying to pay off mortgages, car loans, put their children through school, real Americans who sweated and toiled all in hopes that the next generation of their children would climb higher towards the American dream. The President's new coal regulations will come at a cost of $184 billion and 180,000 fewer jobs each year in mining, transportation, manufacturing, and power generation. As coal energy is cut off, it means higher electric bills. Families will spend $400 more each year on their energy bill. That's on top of the $2,000 more each year they pay for gasoline. And higher energy bills means higher manufacturing costs, hurting our steel industry even more as it struggles to compete in world markets. We should be modernizing, not shutting down these coal power plants. We can burn coal cleanly. Since 1970, coal has tripled in its use. Meanwhile, sulfur dioxide emissions are down 56%, nitrous oxides down 38%, mercury emissions in the U.S. has dropped roughly 60% since the 1950s. Let's bring back the campaign promise made by President Obama for clean coal and use the talent of our scientists and engineers and our tradesmen for better technology. This week, families throughout America were startled when a top Obama science advisor was quoted in the New York Times saying, quote, "A war on coal is exactly what we need," unquote. But this is not just a war on coal. It is a war on the American worker and their family. These families want high-paying jobs and lower energy bills. They want doors to open, not to have them slam in their faces. They do not want Washington to surrender American jobs to foreign manufacturers because these fathers and these mothers and these children will not surrender. They are waking up and saying, stop the war on our jobs, and they are not going to sit back quietly much longer. I yield back.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today and talk a little bit about energy. Later on today we'll be talking more about the Offshore Energy and Jobs Act, part of the Republican Party's All of the Above energy program. And it's a good opportunity for us to talk about various different things in energy. I was home, Mr. Speaker, a couple weeks ago going through one of my manufacturing facilities in my district, and I asked some of the folks who were working there, what could we do here to help create more American manufacturing jobs? And I was struck by the answer. The answer was very clear. They said, keep our energy costs down. They also talked about regulation. They also talked about health care. They talked about a lot of the things that we hear all over the place. But to have the first thing that they mentioned to me was to keep energy costs down was very interesting. And I asked them, I said, why is it so important? They make rings, rolled rings. They do heavy manufacturing. It's a metal foundry. And they said that not only does lower energy keep their cost of materials down and make them more competitive in the world, but lower energy also keeps their cost of operations down, which makes them more competitive in the rest of the world, and obviously kept the cost to their employees down of simply getting back and forth to work. Low energy costs were the best thing we could do for this heavy manufacturer back in South Carolina. I think that's very instructive to us, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to answering the question, what are we doing for jobs? We're here today to talk about not just energy, but about jobs. The original objection, one of the big pieces to our all-of-the-above proposal is the Keystone Pipeline. Many people have heard about it, and I want to talk for a few minutes about it today. One of the biggest objections the President made to it originally when it came out was environmental, and many people saw this map. The map from Alberta, Canada, down to the Gulf of Mexico, where it very prominently featured by the administration that this went through a large aquifer with a name that I cannot pronounce in all seriousness. The administration wanted to draw attention to the fact that, oh my goodness, this pipeline went through this aquifer. It was going to poison the drinking water in all these Midwestern states, and wasn't that a terrible thing? This was the map the administration wanted all of us to see. This is the map of the real world. This is the map that shows where these pipelines already function, and function extraordinarily well. There are pipelines all over the central part of this country, all over this aquifer already, without any harm to any person. Aquifers usually are several hundred feet deep, and pipelines are 10 or 20 feet deep. We have the ability, we have the know-how to do this safely and soundly. We've been doing it for over a century in this country. There are no environmental risks to going in this particular location through this particular aquifer. We know how to do it, and we know how to do it well. Now we hear a new objection, Mr. Speaker. We hear an objection that the administration doesn't want to backslide. I heard an interview today where a Democrat activist used that word 6 or 8 times in about 2 minutes. Didn't want to backslide on carbon. That we couldn't do this pipeline because it would encourage additional use of gasoline. It would make gas cheaper, and that would be bad because we would use more of it. That's the administration's current position. It's absolutely absurd. If you go to Canada, if you go to where the oil sands are, to where this raw material is, who will you see? You'll see the Chinese. If we don't use this oil, if we do not refine this oil, if we do not take advantage of this particular natural resource that is right across our border, the Chinese will. And it will be used in a fashion that would offend the sensibilities of most of the people who care about the environment. I've been to China. I remember landing at the runway, not being able to see the end of the runway out of the window because the pollution was so bad. That is how this material is going to be used if we allow it to go overseas. We have the ability now to keep this material in this country. We have the ability now to help keep our energy prices down. We have the ability now to help keep Americans at work and put additional Americans back to work. And to the extent we keep it out of the hands of the Chinese, where there are no rules on how they use this material, we actually have a chance to help the environment. The Keystone Pipeline keeps energy prices down, puts American people back to work, and protects our environment. It's absolutely absurd that it hasn't been approved already, Mr. Chairman, and it needs to be approved now. And with that, I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I speak today of the forthcoming sesquicentennial recognizing 3 bloody days that will forever remain emblazoned on our hearts. The Battle of Gettysburg was a pivotal turning point in the American Civil War, one of the single most defining moments in American history, and one that united the nation and restored peace and prosperity to our great land. Therefore, be it known as we recollect and observe the horrific and critical events that took place in July 1863, that the memory of these brave souls who sacrificed their lives is kept alive through the tireless efforts of the National Park Service and the work of countless organizations. The Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War, other allied orders of the Grand Army of the Republic, the Military Order of the Loyal Legions of the United States, along with the Sons of Confederate Veterans, United Daughters of the Confederacy, and other Confederate heritage organizations, honor all of the brave warriors lost on the fields of Gettysburg. These organizations work together tirelessly to preserve the hallowed ground upon which these Americans, our brothers and sisters, fought, bled, and perished. For as long as there is breath in our chest and light in our eyes, we, the people of these United States, shall keep alive the memory of our ancestors and maintain the peace paid for with their sacrifice during the merciless 4 years of our nation's history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
Members return at noon Eastern for legislative work. On the agenda today, a bill dealing with gas agreements along the U.S.-Mexico maritime boundary in the Gulf of Mexico. Also work on a measure that expands offshore oil and gas drilling. The White House released a statement earlier this week threatening a veto on that bill. Follow the House live when they return in about 45 minutes here on C-SPAN. And the Senate continues work on immigration legislation. They have a few votes scheduled for about 11:30 Eastern, including one to limit debate on the measure. Possible final